For the longest time, in the West at least, Samsung has been largely unchallenged in the flip phone space. But that's about to change thanks to the most surprising foldable I've used so far. I'm Alex Dobie, this is XDA TV. Let's take a look at how the Oppo Find N2 Flip shapes up against Samsung's Galaxy Z Flip 4. The Oppo Find N2 Flip at a hardware level feels like it's a generation ahead of Samsung's Flip 4, and that comes down to a few things. The first and most obvious advantage is that it can fold completely flat, while the Galaxy still relies on an asymmetrical wedge-shaped design when it's folded shut. Oppo's hinge design creates a sort of hairpin-shaped fold inside the hinge, allowing the outer part of the phone to appear flat without putting too much strain on the foldable OLED inside. As a result, it just feels more modern and there's no conspicuous gap here to attract dust or other debris. Oppo's flip phone also allows for a slightly larger internal screen with a wider footprint. Basically, when opened out, this just feels like any other large Android phone, like a Pixel 7 Pro or OnePlus 11, slightly larger screen borders notwithstanding. It's just more like a regular smartphone when it's opened out. The Flip 4, by comparison, still feels tall, but not necessarily roomy. There is a much less noticeable crease in the internal screen with the Oppo device too, and the display itself is less reflective than the Flip 4's. That means it's easier to use outside, and once again when it's opened out, it's easier to forget that you're using the inner screen in a foldable. It just feels like any other big screen Android slab phone. Shout out as well to the built-in screen protector, which on the Oppo device seems to have tighter tolerances, putting its edges closer to the very edge of the actual display, and it lacks the slightly bothersome cutout that you get around the selfie camera with the Samsung device, which always kind of bugged me. Oppo's design language is fairly similar to Samsung's, especially in this purple color that I've been using in both phones here. There's also a matte black for the Oppo device, which blends more subtly into the surface of that large outer display. But once again, Oppo boasts a noticeably slimmer design and larger outer display. Eventually, I think it's inevitable that all flip phones will just dedicate this entire surface area to the outer display, but until we get there, Oppo offers the roomier experience on its external screen. Oppo's outer panel lets you see more notifications at once, but other than that, Oppo's not doing a whole lot more than Samsung with its cover display. There are 6 widgets to choose from in the current firmware version, covering the obvious things like camera, weather, timers, calendar events, and sound recording. But unlike the Moto Razr, you're not going to be running tiny versions of full-scale Android apps on here, at least not anytime soon. That said, this is something Oppo could very easily add in a future software update, so we'll have to wait and see. Everything about Oppo's build quality is top-notch, from the very subtle wavy pattern adorning the hinge to the aforementioned screen protector tolerances and the haptics, which definitely feel sharper than the Flip 4's. However, there is one area where I think Samsung's hinge, despite its gappy design, is actually superior. The Flip 4's hinge is stiffer than Oppo's, making it easier to keep the Samsung device open at a very narrow or very wide angle. With the Oppo Flip, it'll swing open or closed at these angles, so the range of usable angles is a little bit narrower. And maybe this is just me, but I found the surface of the Oppo Flip to be slightly slipperier than Samsung's, likely because of the glossy exterior in the color that I'm using. This is definitely a phone that's liable to fall off an armchair or any other soft surface if you leave it for long enough. In a somewhat surprising move, Oppo's chosen the MediaTek Dimensity 9000 Plus CPU for its Flip, as opposed to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 used by Samsung. Both are solid high-end chips, though both have since been eclipsed by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And outside of benchmarks, you're not really going to be able to tell the difference between them. If benchmarks are your thing, and especially gaming benchmarks, then the Qualcomm chip gives the Flip 4 a small lead, though I feel safe in saying the effect on frame rates is going to be pretty minimal. And outside of gaming, both phones offer the kind of excellent performance in everyday apps that you would expect for the price. An ample 8 gigs of RAM is included in both, and both have their own RAM booster options that let you sacrifice a chunk of your internal storage to boost your virtual memory. That's just one area of feature parity between Samsung's One UI and Oppo's ColorOS. Both are pretty full-featured, and there's been plenty of cross-pollination of features between the two over the years, whether in multitasking or windowed mode, or even the kind of gestures you can use to quickly hop into split-screen mode. And since both are now based on Android 13, the Flex mode when the phone is partially opened out in apps like YouTube is available across both devices. Besides that, the software question really comes down to aesthetics and your own personal preferences. I like the extra Samsung ecosystem features that I get with the Flip 4, like SmartThings integration, but in terms of looks, I think ColorOS is probably the more attractive UI. Foldables have often had to sacrifice battery life to accommodate their unique foldy form factors, and that's still kind of the case with both of these devices. Neither of them has terrible battery life, but both are comfortably less long-lasting than the current crop of 2023 Android flagships. I always got a full day out of both, with the Oppo device pushing 4 to 4.5 hours of screen on time. With the Galaxy, it was closer to the 4-hour mark. But that said, Samsung has a trick up its sleeve to help out saving battery without noticeably impacting performance. The light performance profile cuts back on the max CPU clock speed to prioritize battery life in everyday tasks. And using this mode allowed the Flip to close some of that battery gap without making it noticeably slower in everyday apps. The fact that a software change was able to make such a difference is kind of surprising, especially when you consider the much larger battery inside the Oppo phone, 4300 mAh versus Samsung's 3700 mAh. But when it comes to charging speeds, it's a very clear win for Oppo on paper, with 44-watt wired fast charging via the bundled SuperVOOC brick. On the Samsung side, you're capped at 25 watts officially, which sounds like a lot less, but in reality both are going to be able to get you out of the danger zone in around 30 minutes, just over 50% on the Samsung side and 60% on the Oppo, though remember Oppo is charging a significantly larger battery there. The bigger disappointment for me is the lack of wireless charging on the Oppo Flip. This also applies to its larger form factor cousin, the Find N2, and means it's less convenient to top up throughout the day with quick opportunistic refills. Given how slick this form factor is though, and how generally reliable the battery life is anyway, and the fact that you get faster wired charging, I'm pretty much okay with it. I don't love it, but I can accept it. And that's me as someone who is and always has been a big fan of wireless charging. Oppo's Hasselblad collab now comes to foldables with the Find N2 range, and so the larger wide sensor in these two phones now comes backed up by the same Hasselblad tuning that you'll find in the Oppo and OnePlus flagships. Overall, it's hard to call a winner between these two camera setups, especially in terms of the wide camera. Samsung's definitely more versatile, and that's mainly down to its ultra-wide, uses a larger sensor with a higher resolution, and in challenging situations you can definitely tell the difference. What's more, Samsung captures a wider field of view with its ultra-wide to a pretty noticeable degree. And yeah, in lower light conditions, you can definitely tell that Samsung takes better, brighter, clearer ultra-wide shots. Shots from the main and ultra-wide cameras are a lot closer in terms of dynamic range, detail, and overall color accuracy. Especially with the AI shooting mode enabled, Oppo captures pleasing but often slightly oversaturated looking photos, whereas Samsung's output is a bit more subdued and true to life. Oppo also has a tendency to brighten shadows to a sometimes unrealistic extent, making for photos that are brighter but less representative of what your eye actually sees. The ceiling in terms of quality is slightly higher on the Oppo side, probably thanks to the more advanced main sensor, but the floor is also lower, especially when it comes to shots from that 8-megapixel ultra-wide. The secret sauce for the Oppo phone though is that large outer screen. It's so much easier to frame up your shots when you're shooting selfies with those rear cameras with this more expansive display. Same deal if you're using the cover screen preview feature to show someone a preview as you're shooting them. With the Flip, although you're probably going to get a great looking shot, you kind of have to just frame yourself up the best you can, take a bunch of shots and hope one of them is going to come out looking the way you want. Oppo's foldable feels in a lot of ways like it's a generation ahead of Samsung's. That's not true across the board of course. Samsung has wireless charging, a better ultra-wide camera and a more reliable track record with software updates, though it's worth remembering that both offer 4 years of Android OS updates and 5 years of security patches from launch. But as an overall product, I found the Oppo Find N2 Flip to just be more enjoyable to use. The build feels like it's from the future. The large cover screen is a pleasure to use, though I do wish it could do a little bit more, and the fast wired charging in this form factor means I'm less bothered by the lack of wireless charging. And this is all the more impressive when you consider the Oppo Find N2 Flip sells for £50 less than the Galaxy Z Flip 4. I think it's inevitable that Samsung's 2023 foldables will be bringing some major hardware updates, both in terms of the hinge and the displays. But those are still months away, and for the here and now in this particular matchup, for me it's a clear win for Oppo. So that's going to do it for today's comparison, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Samsung reacts to challenges like this. More competition is only better for all of us as phone buyers, and there are already some tantalizing rumors around the upcoming Z Flip 5. Take a sec to subscribe, more foldable coverage coming soon, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.